I won't look up too much.
Don't look up too much. Morning. It is time for us to get started this morning with our Bible class. We'll be in John chapter 6 here in a moment. John chapter 6. So if you want to be turning there. Before we do start that, let's go to God in prayer. Our God and Father in heaven, we are thankful for this day, this time in which we can come and open and study from your word. We ask, Father, as we do so, that we open our hearts and minds to what you have revealed, that we will be strengthened and that we will grow stronger and brighter in this world, that more will see your glory and be called into the kingdom. We ask your continued blessings at this time on each of us and on this country and on those who are ill, those who are treating them. That if it be your will, this will be put aside and we can be returned to what would be a normal life. We ask all these things through your Son's name. Amen. John chapter 6. We got to about, well, I think we actually went a little bit past it, but we're going to pick up at verse 22 for a moment. Verse 22, and heading towards the end of the chapter, talking about the two kinds of food, or Jesus is the bread of life, is what we're going to see here. Picking up at verse 22 and going through verse 27, just as a review to tie us to Wednesday night, it says, "The day following, when the people which stood on the other side of the sea saw that there was none other boat there, save that one whereinto his disciples were entered, and that Jesus went not with his disciples into the boat, but that his disciples were gone away. Howbeit there came other boats from Tiberias nigh unto the place where they did eat bread, after that the Lord had given thanks. When the people therefore saw that Jesus was not there, neither his disciples, they also took shipping and came to Capernaum seeking for Jesus. And when they had found him on the other side of the sea, they said unto him, Rabbi, when camest thou hither? Jesus answered them and said, Verily, verily, I say unto you, ye seek me, not because ye saw the miracles, but because ye did eat of the loaves and were filled. Labor not for the meat which perisheth, but for that meat which endureth unto everlasting life, which the Son of Man shall give unto you, for him hath God the Father sealed." You notice here the purpose of miracles, and it appeared the miracles were working for the intended purpose early in this encounter. What is the purpose of miracles? Prove who Jesus was. Actually confirmed the message. Even when the apostles did miracles, it's about confirming the message that it came from God. Remember, Nicodemus was willing to admit that back in chapter 3, that we know you're from God because of the signs, the wonders, the miracles you can do. Here, Jesus says, even that's not working with this people. What was it that those people wanted? All they wanted was food, free food. He filled us up like we've never been filled before. And you think about that. The way that miracle was performed back earlier in the chapter, he took those 5 loaves and those 2 fishes, and it says they ate until they were what? Filled. It wasn't like we normally think, okay, well, we're going to take what we got and we're going to distribute and everybody will get a little bit. And so everybody's got a little food. Everybody got as much as they wanted. And even after that, there were 12 baskets of fragments picked up. They were well fed. That's what they were concerned with. If you think about that in modern terms, do we have a society where that is still happening today? Yeah, when you think about, and it's not that welfare isn't needed to help some people, but think about what welfare creates and how that applies to what's being said here. And that's what Jesus said. The only reason you're coming after me is because I gave you a free meal and you're hoping for another one. The power of the miracle didn't even go on to them because they're only following for the one reason. Look how they respond to that. We're going to pick up at verse 28 now. Verse 28, it says, they said unto him, what shall we do that we might work the works of God? And so those people, there's an initial response to it. Oh, you say we're only after the food. Well, we've seen you can do a miracle. What do we have to do the works of God? Jesus is going to give them an answer. And unfortunately, it's going to start to change people. This is a point in the ministry when he hits a great popularity, but because of his answers, what happens? People begin to turn away. Look at Jesus' answer there as we begin at verse 29. Jesus answered and said unto them, this is the work of God, that ye believe on him whom he hath sent. They said therefore unto him, what sign showest thou then that we may see and believe thee? What dost thou work? Our fathers did eat manna in the desert, as it is written, he gave them bread from heaven to eat. Now, notice Jesus answers and says, and here's a problem people will have today. All you have to do is believe in Jesus. Jesus says that is a what? There's no work you can do to save yourself. But yet Jesus says what in verse 29? This is the work of God. There's a work involved. What is that work? Believe. Does that mean you can just mentally say that Jesus Christ is the Son of God and it would be beneficial then? Not what he says. There is a work involved, an action, something more. So we see him saying that. What is their first question back? Now, set the mode for verse 30. Jesus has done the miracle at the wedding feast of Cana. He's done other miracles that are recorded because Nicodemus saw it. The crowds have followed him because he's been healing people. He's been doing miracles. He's fed the 5,000 men now. And now, what do they ask in verse 30? Yeah, what have you done for me? Like, what sign do you show me now? Does this sound like the Jews or the Israelites of old and the Egyptians of old? Think about the Exodus for just a moment, and the Pharaoh and even the Israelites and all the other Egyptians. You had the first of the 10 plagues, and what was it? Well, that's great, but what else can you do? You had the second, and it was still, okay, but what else can you do? The third, the fourth, the fifth, the sixth, the seventh, the eighth, the ninth. After the ninth one says we're going to have the death of the firstborn. Even then, Pharaoh says, get out of my country, but then does what? Changes his mind. He wants them back. You see that whole picture. None of those miracles did what? The Israelites themselves, they get to the edge of the Red Sea and do what? Whine and complain. Oh, the Egyptians are after us. You've seen 10 plagues. What's God capable of? Here you're in the New Testament. Guess what? Men haven't changed. Jesus has done miracle after miracle after miracle after miracle. And yet, what's the first question out of their mouth when he says, you need to do the works of God? You've already seen my miracles. He said that back in verse 26. Their first question is, what sign do you show us? What are you going to do now? Are we like that sometimes with God? That's the picture we get. Look how Jesus answers this, verse 32, because they point back. Now remember, they got fed. They've now followed Jesus. Jesus says, you're only following me because I filled your stomach, not because of the actual miracle. We see that in their question, don't we? But what do they use as proof? Well, God fed our fathers in the desert with manna. Now, we could think about that one. What did the Israelites have to say about that manna? Imagine getting free food, and what'd you do? Complained. Oh, we're not getting any meat. I'd rather have some onions, some cucumbers, some leeks. I'd rather go back into slavery in Egypt and have those things than this manna. By the way, that term just meant what is it? Because they didn't know what it was. Somebody's providing it every day. Does that sound like what happens, and you hate to say it, in a welfare state? what do people begin to do? You know, it used to be, some of us can remember when I was younger and that, what was the welfare food that came out? You remember the blocks of cheese? That was government welfare. You get a block of cheese and what else? And it was good. Rice. Very basic necessities. They didn't give a whole lot. You didn't get a whole lot of food stamps. You didn't get a whole lot of money to go spend on what you wanted. You got what was surplus. Hey, if corn had a really good crop the previous year and you didn't have a whole lot, guess what got given to you? Well, yeah, they create, but then the slaves get mad and complain, and guess what the government does? That's what Jesus is seeing with the people he's trying to help. They complain about what they're given for nothing. Think about what that's being seen. Jesus answers them. Look at verse 32, how he addresses this very thing. Then Jesus said unto them, Verily, verily, I say unto you, Moses gave you not that bread from heaven, but my Father giveth you the true bread from heaven. For the bread of God is he which cometh down from heaven and giveth life unto the world. Now, Jesus, again, he's met a real need. They had a real physical need back when they were fed. But he's trying to get them to see the what? The real need. What is man's, and this is one I think that man doesn't understand today. What is man's greatest and realist, if we could use that term, need? Salvation. Get away from that destination that every man is going to go to. That is man's greatest and realist need. What does man think his greatest need is? Depends on the person, but in general, it's going to be something what? Yeah, material, physical in nature. It's going to be, I need my favorite dessert after lunch today because it's Sunday and I deserve it. And that's sort of what we say, isn't it? Or it's my birthday and I get the meal I want on my birthday. Or it's, you can go through any numerous things, can't we? That's men, and that's what Jesus is trying to get them to see. They're still concentrating only on the physical. If you notice this throughout the Bible, when Jesus is with his disciples or with the others or whoever, 90% of the discussion has to be about what? What was the whole discussion with Nicodemus initially about? Get away from the physical and think about the spiritual. Unfortunately, man has trouble with that. We see that with how people treat some of those things like the coronavirus numbers right now. Think about how man treats numbers. We don't think about really long-term things, do we? What are we going to have for, when do we worry about lunch? What's a question that's going through our minds right now? What's for lunch today? Once lunch is over, and sometimes it depends on what the holiday is, we might ask it at breakfast, what's for dinner, because then that defines how big a lunch I eat. But I don't worry about really what's for lunch tomorrow until when? Tomorrow. And I don't worry about, man, we have this great thing. We want something to worry about those long-term issues, but we don't want to worry about those long-term issues, do we? What's the easiest way to plan for retirement? By the way, young people, listen to this. Well, that's how the result of it's going to be anyway, but what's the easiest way to plan for retirement? If you have a job and you're under the age of 30, have you opened a 401k yet? You better. Why? Thinking long term, and that's what Jesus is trying to get them to do using this physical thing. Do you know that $20 in a 401k when you're 20 years old is a huge investment? Because that money sits there and it grows from 20 to 21 to 22 to 23 to 24, all the way until you what? Get ready to start using it in your 60s or 70s. Guess what? If you wait till your 50s and you start to try to invest in your 401k and you think putting $100 in your 401k is really doing something, It don't go far because it doesn't have a lot of years to what? Multiply and build up. Here's Jesus looking at them. Moses gave you that bread from heaven, but my Father gives you a different bread. He gives you what? The bread that gives life unto the world. Unfortunately, what life is man only worried about? Today, right now, this life. Why do I need to worry about the life hereafter? Well, because what you do in this life affects it, but men don't see that. They don't want to think about that. They don't understand it. Now, Jesus showed us sometimes we have to do what for men to have the opportunity? Take care of a physical need, right? If someone is truly hungry, and here's how you know if someone's in need. If someone says, well, that's not exactly the kind of food I was hoping for, they're not what? They're not hungry yet. You know how you tell when a person's hungry? When they really want food? When whatever you offer them, unless it's something they are absolutely allergic to and knows will kill them, like, if you walked up to somebody that was allergic to shellfish and they were to take a bite of it, they're going to die. Unless it's something like that, whatever you offer them, they will take and eat, then they're what?
At school, I think I was kids when they were hungry because the way they open the line of cafeteria, like, there's one morning, say, they're fine.
Yeah.
Because they do, they want everything.
There's Elaine's point. When kids are really hungry at the school and they're going through the cafeteria line and they ask, what do you want? They say, everything or anything. That's when they're really hungry. When people have come asking for help, and that's what drives it crazy. I worked in downtown San Antonio for a number of years. The building I worked in was right across the street from Travis Park. It happens to be the Meals on Wheels location for the homeless in San Antonio. You would get up to go to lunch and you would have to pass by there. They would see you come out with an AT&T badge on and they automatically know you're well paid. They're going to ask you for something. People find out you're a Christian. They go, how come you don't help them? And I said one day, okay, let's perform the experiment and I'll show you why I don't directly help sometimes. Determined people are in real need. Man walks up and he says, I just need $5 to get something to eat. I just need, and okay, I'll give you $5. Now, the way it worked, you could go straight down the street and you go to all of the eateries you could imagine, every scale of it, from McDonald's up to the most a 4-star restaurant located just down the street. He turns right at the corner. Within 10 blocks of the right, there's only one store. Has no food in it. All it has is what they refer to as adult beverages. What was the man going for? Was he really hungry? And so I would do it this way. You're hungry? Come with me. I'm going down to McDonald's for lunch. I'll buy you whatever you want at McDonald's. Not limiting you to $5. No, I just need $5. No, you're not hungry then. And people looked at me and I said, that's how you tell. He's not yet hungry. Jesus is trying to do the same thing. Y'all are looking for physical food. You don't understand the spiritual what? The spiritual need, man's greatest problem. You're over here dealing with all the little things when there's something else. Look how he goes on to explain that, beginning at verse 34. Then said they unto him, Lord, evermore give us this bread. What's their whole thing? Will be what? Filled, fat, dumb, and happy, as we would say. And I'll get it for what? Free. Exactly what you see here. Look, verse 35, Jesus said unto them, I am the bread of life. He that cometh to me shall never hunger, and he that believeth on me shall never thirst. But I said unto you that ye also have seen me and believe not. All that the Father giveth me shall come to me, and him that cometh to me I will in no wise cast out. For I am come down from heaven, not to do mine own will, but the will of him that sent me. And this is the Father's will which has sent me, that all of which he hath given me I should lose nothing, but should raise it up again at the last day. And this is the will of him that sent me, that every one which seeth the Son believeth on him may have everlasting life, and I will raise him up at the last day. The only thing they were worried about, what's in my, and we have a tendency to do this too, I'll admit it. When it's a special holiday or when there is lunch and it's one of your favorite meals involved, what are you thinking about through the whole morning? Or your favorite dessert, that's probably the one. Elizabeth, can you have cheesecake yet? No, too bad, isn't it? Because if I said, Elizabeth, you want to go to Cheesecake Factory, even though it's not open at the moment, I don't think, she wants to go, but she can't. Why? There's an understanding there. What's Jesus trying to draw? That understanding between what would be great right now and what? What's better in the long term? Parents, why don't we feed our children chocolate cake for breakfast? Let's use some logic. Does it have eggs in it? Does it have flour in it? Does it have milk in it? Hey, so far it's got everything you want your children to eat for breakfast. Why don't we give our children chocolate cake for breakfast? Very good question. You see, we know it's not good for them. They need a what? A balanced diet. And sometimes it's not about, it balances. Sometimes it's not about what's in it, but also what else is in it, right? And you don't need too much of this item or too much of that. Jesus is saying, think about the diet that really matters. Is the food that goes into our physical bodies very important? Oh, yeah. Well, it all depends, yeah. Unless you offer me the wrong thing. For me, it's sushi. Matt likes sushi. I don't. I was in Okinawa. I've seen what sushi does to a person. The only sushi I like is deep fried. So that's personal. Asparagus. There are some people, Neely loves asparagus. How many others want to have just asparagus for lunch today? I don't see a lot of hands going up, dear. I'm sorry. So we each have our own things. What was it? President Bush, the older Bush, what was his? Brussels sprouts, wasn't it? There will be no Brussels sprouts in the White House during his term in office. Why? He didn't like them. But we understand sometimes we have to have our children eat things they don't necessarily like. They're not their favorite because they need what? That balanced meal. Jesus is saying, balance this. This temporary body has needs. The spiritual body has greater needs, and you're what? Totally ignoring it. And that's what he's trying to get them to see. What is the will of God then? What does he want everyone to do? Receive that bread from heaven. Which bread? Yeah, the bread of life, which is Jesus. Receive what he says, do what he says. Look how the Jews respond to this. Verse 41. Verse 41, the Jews then murmured at him because he said, I am the bread which came down from heaven. What have they done every time he's ever said, even though he had the miracles to back him up, even though as Nicodemus, as a leader of the Pharisees says, we know you came from God because you can do these things. Every time Jesus ever even comes close to mentioning he had authority that came from heaven because of the things he could do, what do the Jews say? Blasphemy. How can he draw himself equal with God? Isn't that what they do right here? Now, think about the number of Jews that are probably standing there that not only knew he fed the 5,000, but were one of those that was fed, and yet they say what? They're going to murmur and complain because he draws himself equal with the power he has. Look how they say this in verse 42. It becomes the problem. And they said, is not this Jesus, the son of Joseph, whose father and mother we know? How is it then that he saith, I came down from heaven? Now, they make this recommendation. If you ever go to preaching school, most of the time they tell you, don't go back, at least for your first work, where you grew up. Why? What do you think? You're always a kid. They remember every crazy thing you did. And they sit there, and exactly what the Jews here, those who were around Nazareth, who had known people, exactly what they did with Jesus. Well, we know who his father is. It's that carpenter guy over on Elm Street or whatever. And we know his mother, she's down there at the marketplace every Tuesday morning buying their flour. And later on, we know they're going to mention his brothers and his sisters. We know them. How can he be any different? He's not respected because they knew him, you hate to say it, too well as a man and not well enough as the Savior. And we can get ourselves in the same thing. Jesus, looking at him in verse 43, answered and said unto them, murmur not among yourselves. No man can come to me except the Father which has sent me draw him, and I will raise him up at the last day. It is written in the prophets, and they shall all be taught of God. Every man, therefore, that hath heard and hath learned of the Father cometh unto me. Not that any man has seen the Father, save he which is of God. He has seen the Father. Verily, verily, I say unto you, he that believeth on me hath everlasting life. We'll pick up at verse 47 and 48 again in a moment. But think about what Jesus has said. He goes, no man can come to me except what? Except the Father draw him. Now there are many who have mistaken what this says here and have taken it in the wrong fashion. Does this mean you cannot come to God without God doing some direct operation upon you? That's how many translate that. They look at this and they say, well, the Father's got to draw them, so God has to reach down in some way, whether it's the Holy Spirit or the Father, whatever. He's got to reach down in some way and do something to me to draw me to Jesus. Yeah, how did people get to anywhere at that point? But look how Jesus explained it in the very next verse. Verse 45. It is written in the prophets, and they shall all be taught of God. And Jesus is making reference back to Jeremiah, and just because it's important, go ahead and let's take a detour to Jeremiah for a moment. Jeremiah 31. The Jews were very big on making sure they knew these Old Testament scriptures. Go to Jeremiah 31, beginning at verse 31. And look what the Old Testament prophet Jeremiah wrote that would eventually happen. First thing, let's lay the groundwork. How did one become a Jew? Born into it. You know, just like how do you become an Alabamian? You're born in Alabama. If you're born in Alabama, you are an Alabamian. I am not an Alabamian. I am a Texan, proud to admit that. That's how it works. So we see the picture. So look at verse 31, what Jeremiah says. And remember, to be a Jew, you had to be born a Jew. It says, behold, the days come, saith the Lord, that I will make a new covenant with the house of Israel and with the house of Judah, not according to the covenant that I made with their fathers in the day that I took them by the hand to bring them out of the land of Egypt, which my covenant they break, although I was a husband unto them, saith the Lord. So there's the picture, that old covenant that was made at Mount Sinai, that Jews, you were born a Jew, you were part of that covenant. He says they broke that covenant even though I was a husband. You think about the first mark of that manna that they got every day and they complained about. What is, and I don't mean to sound, in modern politically correct terms like a sexist here, but what is the husband's role in the family? To provide. Did God provide for his nation in that wilderness? What they have on the ground every morning? Food. And so you see that picture of the husband that he says that. So you see that in verse 32. Verse 33, notice, okay, that covenant's got to go away. That's what Jeremiah is saying. But this shall be the covenant that I will make with the house of Israel. After those days, saith the Lord, I will put my law in their inward parts and write it in their hearts, and will be their God, and they shall be my people. And they shall teach no more every man his neighbor, and every man his brother, saying, Know the Lord. Now, you were born a Jew, but how did you come to know the God of your nation? To use it in those terms. You had to be taught. As you grew up, you were already a Jew, but you were taught to know the Lord. That's the reference here. He's saying, no, that's not going to happen anymore. You're not going to go to your neighbor and say, know the Lord. You're not going to be bringing up his brother and say, know the Lord. Notice how he goes on in verse 34. For they shall all know me, from the least of them unto the greatest of them, saith the Lord. For I will forgive their iniquity, and I will remember their sin no more. How is it that they will know the Lord? Well, think about becoming a Christian for a moment. And this is what Jesus is making the reference over here to. Before you can become a Christian, you have to what? Know the Lord. By the way, infant baptism, can it be valid? According to Jeremiah, let's not even talk about the New Testament. Let's not talk about any of that. According to the Old Testament prophet Jeremiah, would infant baptism today be of any effect? No. Why? Because they have to know the Lord first. You ever tried to talk to a 1 to 2-year-old about knowing the Lord? They know a lot. They're very muchly sponges. They can learn a lot, but do they truly understand yet? No. So Jesus is already giving the picture that to become a Christian, to become a follower of God, a child of God, one is going to have to know God first. How does one come to know God? Through study, through his teachings. How do you want a new job, you have to go something they call an interview. What's the purpose of an interview? By the way, it's not just one purpose, there's actually multiple. They get to know you, you get to know them. Number one, usually there's one stage of the interview that's looking at your knowledge. Now, sometimes that's just straight and flat out, give me your transcript from college or your degree where you graduated or your high school diploma, depending on the level of education you need. At other times, and I've been through that, you went in to interview for a job, they'd hand you a piece of paper that had a description of a problem they wanted solved using a computer, and they'd tell you what language, and they'd give you about 30 minutes to write the program out. That was your knowledge test. The second part of the interview was, what we want to know about you. Tell us about yourself. What about these things in your life? What about this? Then the third part of the interview, and that was always a favorite I had, they turned you over to a whole nother person and they take you out onto the floor of the programming area, depending on what job it was, or through the offices to introduce you to who? The other people that you'd be working with. The idea is, do you have the culture that will fit with us, and does our culture fit with you if you have the right knowledge? What is Jesus doing here? He's providing the same thing as an interview, isn't he? You have to have a certain amount of knowledge. You have to be willing to meet certain criteria of culture. Are you willing to do it? You ever notice that? Unfortunately, a lot of people want the church to what? You accept me, and I love the song Just As I Am in the songbook. I'm not saying it's bad, but you have to take me just as I am. Have you ever noticed the song never says that God takes you just as you are? He finds you just as you are, but the song talks about you having to what? Change. You have to mold to the culture of the church, not the church change to the culture of you. Unfortunately, what has a lot of the world done? What were the Jews willing to do? This is where the Jews were at. You make your thing fit what we want, Jesus. You give us free food. Take care of us physically on this earth. We'll be your followers. What do you mean we have to change? Anybody ever thought about that as we get ready to close this morning? I want to get into verse 48 in a minute, but I want you to think about our military. The Marine Corps, the one I'm most associated with. What's the first thing they do to the male Marines when they arrive at the recruit depot? Cut off their hair. You don't get to change clothes. You don't get your uniforms issued. You get off the bus, you stand on these yellow footprints, and as soon as they've got all the footprints, they're starting to yell and chase you through a door, and the next thing you know, you're sitting in a thing and your hair just goes. Why? What are they starting to do before they do anything else? Make you the same. The one guy might have had hair down past his shoulder blades. Another one might have had, what we'd call a standard male haircut. Another one might have had hair that was longer than Camilla's. Guess what? By the time you're done in that first 20 minutes of boot camp, what does everybody have? Hair like Matt. Exactly the same haircut. Guess what? The girls do much the same way. They don't cut all their hair off, but they give them standards they have to meet. And it has to either be cut to a certain length or pulled up into a bun. Very first thing they do. Then they go get you uniforms. What are they doing there? Well, now you're no longer dressed differently. You're all what? The same. You conform to their culture, not their culture conforms to you. Yeah. It's become one of the problems, and it's infiltrated the church. Jesus was seeing the problem already. He sees it with the Jews. No, we're not. The God's kingdom is not going to conform to you. You conform to God's kingdom. Notice how he goes on to explain this by being the bread of life in verse 48. I am that bread of life. Your fathers did eat manna in the wilderness and are dead. This is the bread which cometh down from heaven, that a man may eat thereof and not die. I am the living bread which came down from heaven. If any man eat of this bread, he shall live forever. And the bread that I will give is my flesh, which I will give for the life of the world. And so Jesus begins to explain, and it actually fits with what we're going to talk about in the sermon this morning. What do we partake of around that table every week? And what are the emblems that are on it? We take bread, which represents his body, his flesh. Well, Jesus said, the bread which cometh down from heaven, I am that living bread. If any man eat of this bread. Now, he's referring straight to the spiritual words. Do we have a physical action that helps to show that? Absolutely. But you see, he's beginning to give that picture already that it's not about what? This physical life, but that spiritual life. Which one are we concentrating on as we go through our lives? And that becomes the big key. Unfortunately, in this country, what is our greatest concentration? Our physical life at this very minute. We don't worry about what we might do in 10 years, really. We worry about right now. Are there other places where people look at it and they think longer term? Yeah. Unfortunately, God wants us to what? Think really long term. We'll close with some math, and that's where we'll let this stand this morning and pick it up Wednesday night. Some math for you. How long is eternity? Forever. Anybody ever hear of that thing called infinity? You know, that sideways 8 that you put on a piece of paper, and you really can't understand it. Here is the most important principle of it, and it's why it applies and why Jesus was saying that spiritual life is so much more important. Any decision you make while you're living in this shell, where you live, what job you take, how many hours you work, what food you buy at the store, all of that has an effect on what? How long this shell lasts, right? They'll tell you if you really want it to do, you got to eat these certain kind of foods, you need to live in this certain kind of area, you got to stay out of the big cities because they have smog, all those kind of things, right? So all those make a decision on how long this shell lasts. How long you want your shell to last, Logan? You want 100 years, 80 years, what? All right, take whatever you're given. We're going to give you 100 for the moment. The decision you make takes 1 year off of that 100. How important is that decision? You think it's pretty good? Okay. If I could be guaranteed a certain number of years for doing certain things, absolutely. Those decisions now become what? Very important. Do you know every one of those decisions affects our spiritual life, and it's the difference between reward and punishment, either one lasting for infinity. And to give you a concept of how big infinity is, take the largest number you can comprehend, multiply that number by itself, then raise it to the power of that itself again, and guess what you've just begun to understand? The first second of infinity. Now that's the only way I can think to explain what infinity is and why it works the way it does. Because it's so big, you cannot comprehend it. Any way you could think of to comprehend it, guess what? I'll just raise it to the power of itself. Another person said, well, you think about however long a period of time you want and add 1 day. And you think you've got that in hand, just add another. You think you got that in hand, add another. And you think you got that in hand, add another day. That's infinity. That's eternity. That's what the decisions that affect that spiritual life. That's what Jesus is talking about. And we'll see how the Jews respond to that when we pick up on Wednesday night. Any other comments or questions this morning? If not, we'll see you back in a few for worship.